You've been doing this kind of work before you retired for around 25 years. And I imagine you must have seen some change over that period of time in the way people thought about PTSD. Do you have a sense of evolution over that period of time?
Well, I would say not really, because it didn't really. Of course, in previous military situations, it was called
Battle fatigue,
battle
shell
fatigue,
shock.
shell shock, yeah, those kinds
Yeah.
of things.
Right.
And I remember as a young psychologist talking to my own father about that. Did you experience any of these kinds of experiences, these kinds of symptoms? This might have been in the early 70s when this was, we as a profession were just starting to learn about or conceptualize post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'll never forget, he said to me, of course, this is a father-son interaction, so it's laden with all sorts of important dynamics, but he said, I have never been the same since.
Mm-hmm.
And that always struck me, that something happens when trauma hits a person that changes everything.
Yeah.
And I didn't know really what it was until I was in those group sessions with the Vietnam veterans. And as you know, most of those men volunteered to fight communism, so to speak. They volunteered, especially the first part of the war, before the lottery came on board, because they believed in a patriotic mission. But the way the military structured the tours of duty, just 13 months, and then you weren't there for the duration. And the military procedures that were being used, the combatants became quickly disillusioned about how their service was being used as a political expedient.
Yeah, yeah. And they came home to instead of to parades and celebration for being, for guarding the homeland, etc.
And so this disillusion
upon and reviled.
Yes, they were, and what that did, I thought, as I learned from those men, is it robbed them of their value system. And without a value system, human beings, in my opinion, cannot cope with very much at all. We're pretty wimpy. But with a value system, a parent protecting an offspring, or a combatant saving his homeland, we can cope with almost anything.
Yeah.
A migrant walking across Mexico. Can you imagine the kind of stress that those kinds of families are having to deal with?
Oh yeah, terrible situation right now.
Yes, and it's been repeated time and time again that all of these traumatic experiences are coped with because people have an overriding value system that keeps them keeping on.
Yeah, another way that I conceptualize that as a quasi-Jungian type person is a story, a guiding myth, but it's really the same notion that you're talking about, that it fits within a larger meaning framework of who we are.
Well, yes, and everybody has a narrative about our own life.
Sure.
And the narrative of somebody going along with their life before trauma might be, hey, I like my life, everything's going great, it's tough sometimes, but I can handle this, and this is going to be great. But then the trauma hits, and they're raped, or they're sexually abused, or the tornado blows away their house, or the house is flooded, as in Houston last year. And then the internal dialogue which, you know, we are always engaged in internal dialogue. It is constant, even in our sleep, I think. You're a Jungian, so you know that the
In our dreams, certainly.
that's right. But that internal dialogue, especially for those 20% who develop, of trauma survivors who develop PTSD, becomes, this is horrible. I can't handle this. I can't see any way out of this. Nobody can understand me. I hate the way this is. I can't do anything about it. Help me. Leave me alone. So that internal dialogue, a normal internal dialogue gets changed after a shattered life into this excessively negative one that is lacking in self-efficacy and belief that anything can be done. And that can go on for decades. Some of those men in the Vietnam, well, any theater of war, that is a major shattering of one's life and one's life narrative.
Yes.
To see and do what they are forced to see and do. As is, you just think about that. Any kind of traumatic experience just sort of stops life as usual. And unless we can figure out a way to help those people rewrite that narrative, like you said about the mythology, you got to return the mythology to its previous place wherein you were coping and on board with joy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, you've got 6 cases that are sort of composite cases, as we were discussing.
Yes, sir.
And one is called Ashley, who is your co-author, actually. The Road to Patience is Paved with Pain is the subtitle of that section. You've got Ben, A Path Followed Blindly. Felicia, Trust Drowned.